Amy Herman teaches CIA agents, amongst others, how to improve their visual intelligence in a very interesting way by looking at art. What she points out is how often we confuse seeing with thinking. How could the imperative, say what you see, help us break free of assumptions holding us back?
Hey friends, welcome back to the Evolving Leader Podcast. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
How are you feeling today, Mr. Gomes?
Oh, I am feeling, what am I feeling? I'm feeling a mixture of things because I read the book from our guests that she's just published over last weekend, and I got completely absorbed in it for a number of reasons. I love art, as you know, and so I was trying not to read it for the wrong reasons. I was trying to understand it and kind of for this interview, but I just got absorbed in it. So I'm probably not as objective as I would normally be. So that's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling just absorbed. How are you feeling, okay, Scott?
I'm feeling intrigued and excited to speak to our guest today. I love the concept. I love what she does. So let's just dive right in today because we are joined by Amy Herman, who is a lawyer and art historian who helps experts increase their visual intelligence in a very intriguing way. She uses works of art. This has taken her on quite an exciting journey, working with some of the world's most astute visual specialists, crime scene and forensic scientists from the FBI, Interpol, New York City Police Department, the military, the U.S. State Department, the intelligence community, and numerous Fortune 500 companies. She's published 2 bestsellers, one of which you just mentioned a moment ago, and has given a highly viewed TED Talk, which I absolutely loved myself. Amy, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy Friday. I'm really glad to be here.
Amy, welcome. How are you feeling today?
I'm doing well, thank you. I'm doing okay. I was just listening to your intro, and the only change I have to make is that I'm a recovering lawyer. I like to say once you leave the law, you're always in recovery. I wish I could get absorbed in my book. I love reading a good book and getting absorbed, but my book is it's like a wedding. You only see the things that went wrong, so that when I'm reading it, I see this little this little error that got through the copyright. And I love the concept so much and I love the art that it's almost impossible for me to read my book and get absorbed. But I'm thinking about all the long flights I have and how I'm looking forward to really getting absorbed in books.
So before we get into your work, can you shed a little bit of light on you as a person, get to know you? I'd love to understand how you combined what I assume is a skill set you developed as a lawyer and then your passion for art. But you combine those two things into a pretty unique, one-of-a-kind job. Tell us how you got there.
If my 19-year-old son were sitting here on the conversation with us, he'd say, she made it all up. That's what he'd say. She made it up, which is not that far from the truth. The passion for art history came first. I studied art in undergraduate studies, loved it, had my aha moments, thought this rocks my world. I can't believe someone painted these things that I was looking at. And when I got to the end of college, I thought, well, I don't want to teach, and I didn't know what to do. So I do what a lot of people do. I went to law school. From minute one, day one, I hated it. I didn't like it, but I did it because I knew that the skill set would be good, and I like the analytical way of thinking and the idea of bringing people to your side. And so I just kept following the path. I was a sheep, and I worked at a firm for 5 years, and finally I had this reconciliation that I can't do this the rest of my life. And I realized at that point, 5 years in, that knowing what you don't want to do is as important, if not more important, than knowing what you do want to do, because you can check those things off your list. But I thought, I don't want to waste this education. I don't want to waste my experience. So I decided to go into the art world initially as a lawyer. And then once I got my foot in the door, not to use a silly platitude, but I don't want to seize opportunities. I have to make opportunities. So while I was at the Frick Collection, which is where I started my work here in New York, I started this program that I'm doing now, and it was for medical students only. And the reason I was able to start it so effortlessly is because A, it's not rocket science, and B, it wasn't my idea. They were doing it up at Yale with Yale Center for British Art and Yale medical students. And the idea was easy: bring medical students into an art museum, teach them how to analyze works of art so that when they return to that clinical setting, the idea is they'll be better observers of their patients. So with Yale's gracious permission, I was able to take those two practical disciplines, legal analysis and visual analysis, and combine them. And I started my own version at the Frick Collection. And then in 2004, when it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, my world imploded. So that's how it started.
Did you coin the phrase visual intelligence, or did that come from Yale?
It came from me, but to give credit where credit is due, it came from my first publisher.
Okay.
We were sort of battling about a title for this book. And he said, well, what is it exactly that you do in a nutshell? And I said, well, I encourage people to see what others don't. He said, that's not a title. What can we come up with? And we came up with visual intelligence. And the subtitle of the first book was even more interesting than visual intelligence because it says, sharpen your perception, change your life. And I said to my editor, Eamon, I don't change people's lives. I teach them how to see differently, but I don't change lives. And he proceeded to tell me a story of how he saved someone on the subway here in New York because he was reading my manuscript. And I said, all right, you win. It's in the subtitle. So visual intelligence is the idea of seeing what other people don't, and also simultaneously filtering out of the noise, because we're bombarded, with social media and texts and our phones and our computers and 24-hour news cycle, that we have to use some filtering mechanism or our brains will implode. So visual intelligence is being able to see what matters.
Can you share? Now I have to hear the story of your publisher saving
sure.
somebody's life because he was reading your manuscript.
It was incredible. I said, come on, Eamon. Eamon doesn't mince words. And he said that he was on the Q train one morning coming into work. This was pre-pandemic. Everyone was on the Q train. And he noticed a woman across the aisle coughing. Now, if this were pandemic days, the car would clear out. But he noticed her coughing. And most people on the subway ignore somebody coughing, but she kept coughing. And then she started looking in her purse. And she became more frantic, looking in her purse. And Eamon looked at her and looked at her purse. And he realized that she was having an asthma attack. And she was looking for an inhaler. She couldn't find it. Now, again, 99.9% of New Yorkers will avoid this situation like the plague. When the train pulled into the station, every train in New York City has a conductor in the middle car and in the front car. Eamon went to the middle car and he said, you need to take this train out of service in car 3625. There's a woman having an asthma attack. She can't find her inhaler and you need to call EMS right now. And they did. And as Eamon was leaving the subway station, EMS was coming down. And I said to him, don't be ridiculous. You would have done that had you not read my book. And he said, no, your book gave me the wherewithal to notice the car number that I was in, to think about where I could get help. And I always know there's a conductor in the center car. And I use the lingo of the subway system, take the train out of service. And he said, I was able to use economy of language and pair it to my visual observations to get that woman the help that she needed. And then he added, and I didn't have to touch her. I just could take my visual observations and take it to somebody who could put the help that she needed into place. And he said, but for your manuscript, I just would have gone to work. So I gave in. I said, all right, you can make the title, Sharpen Your Perception, Change Your Life. That was the story. It was pretty powerful for me to hear.
Yeah. Well, that's a kind of publisher you need, Scott.
Yeah.
So
I have no hope of changing anybody's life.
Well,
neither did I, Scott. Truthfully, neither did I. But it is humbling for me as I go on this journey to hear how people have taken the training and what they've read in the book and applied it to their lives in ways I could never, ever imagine.
That's incredible.
You've got an audience. I mean, you've worked with some incredible people whose whole job depends on visual intelligence. And so if they are queuing up to go on your course, they're obviously getting something incredible out of it. What is the takeaway for them? What are they actually getting? We'll come back to what it is that you're doing, but what do they actually get?
Well, I had an experience recently. I train special operations. I train Navy SEALs. I work with these elite teams. And I have to say, after all these years of working with them, I'm still a little intimidated because I go in there and I think, well, what could I possibly teach these guys? They go into hostile territory in the dark of night. They have one mission and one mission only. It's called critical mission. Failure is not an option. And I'm taking them through an art museum. Seriously, what's the takeaway? So I was there. I work in teams. They're teams of 9, the special operations teams. So I'm there with a brand new team and their commander introduces me. I've been working with him for a long time. I adore him. And, it's expletive laced what he's telling them. And he said, You're going to be with this woman for 6 hours. I want you to listen to everything she says and remember everything that you see because you're going to use every goddamn piece of it. And then he leaves the room. And I was like, okay. No pressure there. And you know what? I leave that 6-hour day with them. I don't know who's more tired, them or me. I learned so much from them, but I see their takeaways because I am putting them in an unfamiliar environment. An art museum that's closed to the public because they can't be seen by the public. An art museum is a foreign place for them. And the works of art that we're looking at that I assigned to them are completely foreign data, and they have to succeed. They have to do this mission. They have to be successful. And at the end of the day, they line up, they shake my hand, and I wish them Godspeed, and let's hope it works. So far, so good.
So what is visual intelligence then? You kind of give us a very kind of high-level description of it. Can you go a little bit deeper into what it is?
Sure. Visual intelligence is the idea. I bifurcate the definition. First, visual intelligence is being able to filter out what we need to see. As I said, our world is laden with information, disinformation, crap. We have too much coming at us at all times. I mean, I walk from one end of the street to the other in New York, and if my brain tried to process everything that I saw, 11 o'clock, I was walking home from a bar in my neighborhood the other night, and what I saw in one block, I came home, I had to take a deep breath. So visual intelligence is your ability to filter out what you need to live your life, to engage with the people that matter and the things that matter in your life, and filter out the other stuff and say, you know what, I don't need this. I'm not even going to give it the time. And the other piece of visual intelligence, I know we're on an audio podcast, but it's this. I'm going to show you the cover of the book. What this is why I chose it as the cover, and I'll describe it for people who are listening. It is a work of art by a woman named Kumi Yamashita, and what she did is she arranged these blocks, and they seem to be randomly scattered, right? And they seem to be just chaotic. But what she did is she used her visual intelligence, and she thought about these blocks not just as their property of blocks, but collectively the shadows that they would cast. And what you can't see is off to the left side. She's shining a single source of light through these scattered blocks, and it creates this beautiful silhouette. Those blocks create the silhouette. That's what visual intelligence is, seeing things that other people can't. So the rest of us, see these randomly scattered blocks, and what she does is makes order out of chaos. And that's what visual intelligence enables you to do, to make order out of chaos by seeing what other people don't.
It's interesting because that is the only image that I haven't really paused on to understand it. And as soon as you've explained it, it takes on a completely different meaning, and it's incredible. But
it's quite stunning also. And when she agreed to have it on the cover of the book, I said, that's it, we're done. We're not looking for any other work of art. That's going to be it.
So how do you learn to see what's not there, see more through filtering? Because as you were talking about filtering out information, I'm thinking about, John and I talk a lot with leaders about needing to see more and exclude less stuff, right? So that there's a tendency for people to get pretty myopic and be kind of on autopilot, just kind of going through their days, not really seeing anything. But you're actually talking about deep insight. So I think you articulate these sort of 4 processes, the 4 A's, I think you call it: assess, analyze, articulate, and act. Is that the framework for this?
Yes, it is. But I also think before we could actually do the 4 A's, you have to take one affirmative step that a lot of people are reticent to do, and that's to step out of your comfort zone. I believe that the best things happen on the exit ramp of your comfort zone. And when Jean just asked me before, what are these takeaways? The thing that precedes the takeaway is putting these elite Navy squads in an art museum, because I'm not in a military setting. I don't go to their training unit. We bring them to an art museum, and when you change your environment, you immediately change how you see things and what you're looking at. And so I think to get these insights, you need to get out of your comfort zone, because as you said, myopia sets in. You know that going from point A to point B is successful, so why not just keep repeating what works? But that gets old really fast, and you lose your edge, and you lose your sense of innovation, and people stop looking at you as a visionary. But when you step out of that comfort zone, show other people that you're willing to go someplace that's a little scary. My analogy is, I love to swim in the ocean. I love, love, love getting past where the waves break. I'm one of those people out there. There are jellyfish and there are red tides and riptides and the possibility of sharks. Yeah, it's dangerous, but what can compare with riding a wave in at 7:00 on an August night? Like nothing compares with that. And so I think leaders need to change their environment, be willing to get outside their comfort zone, and that's what makes them leaders. And I'll give you one other example because it's forefront of my mind. I started doing something in December. It's not nearly as macabre as it sounds. I have no spare time, but somehow I managed to find time to become a volunteer. And I volunteer my time. I spend time with people who are actively dying. I spend time with people who are dying so they don't have to die alone. And that's not as macabre and it's not as selfless as it sounds. I get more out of it than they do. But the reason I tell you is because step out of my comfort zone. Most people are not comfortable sitting in a room with someone who's dying. But it also gives me a sense of presence to think about things where I don't have a phone in my hand because I'm sitting with a person who's dying. And also, it enables me to see things that I wouldn't see otherwise. Most of these people are not responsive, and I can look around the room and get so much about their life from what's there, and more importantly, what's not there. So I think the big answer to your question is stepping out of your comfort zone to see other things and then going back in.
So let's try and understand what it feels like for one of these people from the intelligence community or from the Navy SEALs when they're presented with one of these works of arts, which we're making a big assumption here that they feel completely outside of the comfort zone because they might be art lovers.
It's a fair assumption, trust me. It's a fair assumption. Yeah. They're out of their water completely, and I love that. I'm in mine, they're out of theirs. It's all good.
Yeah. So
I love being in charge.
So what are they going through? What's the process and what are they going through?
Well, I ask them, when people say to me, is there any pre-reading or preparation for this? There isn't. I want a clean slate when people come in. And one of the things that's particular to the intelligence community, whether it's students or analysts or actually military intelligence officers, agents, is that I want to rely on their ability to recognize patterns, to call on their experience and say, you know what, I've seen this before. I've done this before. There are certain elements here that are similar to that, but I need them to make sure that pattern recognition does not evolve into patterns of expectation. So just because you see a certain scenario doesn't mean that it's going to have the same end result. So when I put them in front of two works of art and I say, I want you to compare that painting and that painting, and they first look at it and say, well, they have nothing in common. And I say, spend 5 minutes with it and I'll be back. And then they have 5 minutes to talk about similarities and differences. So what I'm asking them to do is to not just recognize patterns, but articulate similarities, nuances, and details. Because when you're on critical mission, that's the key. Those nuances and details are the key to the success of your mission. So by just subbing out, a military scenario and subbing in art, you're still looking at visual data. It's just different. And for them, it's engaging them in a neuroplasticity. I'm using their right side of their brain instead of their left side of their brain, which they have to use all the time. But let's give that left brain a rest. Let's engage your right brain. Get some neuroplasticity going because as one of my favorite, I adore him. He's an intelligence analyst. I've been working with him for 100 years. He said, I'm giving him credit. He said, neurons that wire together, fire together. So if you're looking at a work of art, and your brain is working in a way to solve a problem in front of that work of art, when that problem arises in another context, my hope is that your neurons will wire together again.
And tell us a little bit about their emotional experience in doing this, because they're out of their comfort zone. It's probably easy for some people to kind of fold their arms and go, this is a waste of time, or, they've obviously been set up by their boss not to think like that. But what's their emotional response in these situations look like?
The good news is their emotional response usually comes later. I don't give them time for an emotional response. I really draw a line between subjective information and objective information. When I tell them, you're going to look at a work of art, and if you like it or not, irrelevant to me. I don't really care about that.
Yeah.
It's when we debrief and they leave, they realize how powerful art is. I mean, I know about the power of art because I'm an art historian. I've been studying it for years. I love it. What I'm trying to do is channel that power of art to help leaders across the professional spectrum leverage that power, exploit it, get stuff out of it that they can apply directly to the work that they do. And only afterwards they say, that piece was just incredible. I saw this sculpture and it took my breath away. But taking your breath away is not something that they need as a leadership concept, but they can experience that emotionally when it's over. But I draw a pretty hard line between subjective and objective observations. So it's always emotional for me, but I also love to watch them. When the light goes on over their head, I can see it. Because as you articulated, in the beginning, you have some guys with their eyes crossed and they're thinking, seriously, you've got me in an art museum for the next 4 hours. Who is this woman? She doesn't do what I do. And within about 20 minutes, they realize I don't do what they do, but the tools that I'm giving them are going to help them do their work more effectively. It's the hope.
Yeah. Well, Scott and I are really fascinated with this idea of surfacing and busting our assumptions. And can you talk to us a little bit more about what you just mentioned there in terms of distinguishing between objective and subjective conclusions?
We live in a subjective world. Very little is objective anymore. And I find that people shut down conversations. They say, well, I don't like that. Or, nope, that's not going to work for me, without really getting to the root of what the problem is. And often the root of the problem is a bias, an assumption, a preconceived notion about something that often is not true. And so I'm using art to clean the slate. I'm taking people into an art museum, or when I do this virtually, which I've been doing for the past 2 years, it cleans the slate in the sense that you said, most people are out of their comfort zone. 99% of the people that I work with do not look at art for a living. And I'm saying, yes, we're looking at works of art, but I'm going to hold your hand and connect the dots to what you're saying and observing, to what you're doing in the boardroom, in the conference room, and everything in between. And so there are tangible connections, but we have to be able to filter out the subjective information. And in so doing, you make people aware of how subjective so much of what they do and so much of what they talk about really is. And, in the beginning, when these guys say, well, I don't like this, my response is, I don't care. I don't care if you like it or not. That's good on you. Take that with you, but not relevant here. And the truth is, for so many of the people that I work with, what they see the best and the very worst of humanity. Excuse me. And they don't like what they see. My homicide investigators in New York City, oh my God, what have they seen? So not liking what you see cannot be a barrier to doing your job. You see a triple murder, 2 of the victims are under the age of 12. Nobody likes that, but you're not going to say, well, you know what, I'm not going to do this investigation because it upsets me too much. Not an option. So I'm going to show you works of art that you might think are silly and irrelevant and a waste of time, but I'm the part of the artist. But you know what? That's your assignment and you have to deal with it.
You said something in there. You mentioned confronting biases. I'd like to hear more about that. I'd be really interested in ways that you've seen the experience with this art help to confront and maybe even resolve some biases people have?
Yeah, I have a great exercise because, bias is one of those trigger words for people. Hello, Florida. People talk about bias and all of a sudden the conversation shuts down or it takes on a whole different tenor. And most people, when you ask them what a bias is, they really don't know. They'll say, well, it's a prejudice. And I have this great visual exercise. And I think it illustrates a bias beautifully. I put up 2 portraits. One is George Washington and one is Abraham Lincoln. George Washington is a painting, Abraham Lincoln is a photograph. And I say, okay, everyone in the class, what do you see? And I say, we call them number 1 and number 16. Just keep it easy. What do you see, number 1, number 16? And, it's the rare person who says, well, number 1's a painting and number 16's a photograph. They'll tell me, very presidential. Lincoln looks exhausted. He looks like he's been through the Civil War. Like, everyone attaches what they know instead of telling me what they see. So we all talk about 1 versus 16. And then I take number 1 down and I put up Kehinde Wiley's portrait of Barack Obama. So you've got Abraham Lincoln and Barack Obama. And I watch the room transform. Some people cross their arms. Some people smile. Some people look really unhappy. And some people just roll their eyes. And I say to them, if you were standing here, I said, I just changed George Washington to Barack Obama. What has just changed? Every single one of you in the room has lived through not 1, but 2 administrations of the man on the left. You have skin in the game. I don't care if you like Obama, you hate Obama, you are indifferent to Obama. You have a personal stake in looking at Barack Obama. You have all kinds of things going on in your head. Not so much with Washington and Lincoln. And how you see Obama, the lens over your eye is going to affect how you see Abraham Lincoln right next to him. Mm-hmm. I said, when I have Washington and Lincoln up, nobody in this room, as far as I know, has lived during the administration of those two men. And if you did, tell me what you eat for breakfast, because I want to know who you are. There's no skin in the game with Washington and Lincoln. I take down Washington, put up Obama, everything changes. That's what bias is. Bias is a personal experience with one thing affecting how you see something else. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, oh, I get it. So the bottom line for a bias, for me, I can't change anybody's biases. There are too many, every profession, every person has them. All I want to do is make you aware that you operate your life. You live your life according to the biases, the good and the bad biases that you have. And in the cases where you need to change them. But the first step starts with being aware of what an implicit bias is. When you look at the portrait of a black president of the United States, under whose administration you lived, you're going to have feelings about it, not so much Abraham Lincoln. That's what bias is. Skin in the game.
You've got some opportunities to be fairly provocative with people in some of the things that you do. Tell me what that's about, what it creates in people.
You know, I one of the key takeaways from my presentations and from my books, I have a third book coming out, by the way. I don't have it in front of me. It's a book for 9 to 13-year-olds, and it's based on my first book, because who needs to see? Kids really need to see. Anyway, we'll talk about that later. But the key takeaway for the kids' book and the adults' book is be able to distinguish between what you see and what you think. They're two very different things. They're very, very different things. And when people start in a discussion and say, well, I think we should do this, why don't you tell me what you see first before you tell me what you think? So the key for business leaders, I'll give you an example. There's a problem in the department and the chairman wants to nip it in the bud. Let's get everybody together Friday morning, 10 o'clock, mandatory meeting, bring your coffee. We are going to solve this problem. So he comes in and he says, okay, we've got a problem. We are not leaving this room until we solve it. The first step should be go around the room and ask each person to articulate what they see the problem as. Because as much as the head of the department wants to believe it's all about her and what she thinks, it's not. Every person in that room has a different perception of the problem, its nuances, and its details. So let's say what we see before saying what we think. And people waste time. They dive in. Well, this is what I think. Nope, tell me what you see first. And so I use two nude portraits of two women. One is from the 18th century. One is from the 21st century. They're both nude white women. They're brunettes. They're reclining on couches. They're in sort of provocative poses. And I ask people, tell me similarities and differences. One of the women is huge. She's morbidly obese and one's really thin. And no one ever wants to say that. And finally, I'll say to a group of 200 cops, did anyone notice that these two women are different sizes? And they all look at the floor and say, oh, no, we didn't notice. Of course you noticed. Of course you noticed. It's the first thing you notice, but nobody wants to talk about it. So we need to say what we see and then say what we think. And when you're dealing with provocative, difficult, sensitive, awful situations, it's actually easier to talk objectively. Well, this is what I saw before telling people what you think.
They might have said
it actually gives them a way out.
They might have said something different 20 years ago.
They might have. Yes, they might have. But things, that's part of the culture now is we can't talk about certain things. And talking about the fact that one woman is larger than the other, it's purely objective. Nobody's passing judgment. And a woman came up to me after one of the sessions and she said, you really, I was embarrassed for you. You were body shaming. And I said to her, are you talking to the right person? Body shaming? She said, yes, you highlighted the differences between these two women's bodies. And I said to her, I really had to control myself. I said to her, you know what? I'm a cancer survivor. I've had more parts of my body taken out, cut up, open. I'm a walking wall of scars. I'm the last person that's going to body shame. Why don't you choose your words a little differently, and then we'll have this conversation. She hit the wrong button.
So let's just stick with this for a moment. Not that particular story, but this idea.
Well, it's just, people don't choose their words very well. And I'm thinking, body shaming, where'd that come from? Anyway.
Well, she was obviously feeling something.
She was, and she apologized later.
Well, that's why I think it's really interesting you make this distinction between what you see and what you think, because I don't recognize many people being aware of that at all, that the visual information that they are making sense of translates into an objective understanding. but that what they're thinking is really about belief and assumption. Those are two different things. So how do you help people to really, really come to terms with that, to almost like build a muscle of making the distinction between thinking and seeing?
Well, I have to start out with what is their professional objective. That's why I always need to know the people that I'm working with. What do you do for a living? What do you do? Because here's a quote. I hate museum wall texts, but I saw one the other day that really resonated, and it said, how you look at something is fundamental to what you see. How you look at something is fundamental to what you see. So if you are trying to read a report on your computer and you're working remotely and your kid just threw up and the dog is running out the door, are you really going to be attuned to the nuances and details that you need to get out of that report when you know your kid is throwing up and the dog just ran out the front door, as opposed to when you're sitting in the office and it's quiet and you're listening to your music and you're going line by line by line? So when I know what people are doing professionally and what their obstacles are, I give them tools and I pick the works of art accordingly and say, okay, look at this. And I'll give them some really busy, crazy, a million things going on in the painting. And I say, come up with 3 questions that you want to ask that are not answered by your visual analysis of this painting. And so I draw their attention to situations that are crazy and ask them to distill parts of it out, because depending on what they do professionally, that's often what they're called upon to do. So I want to strengthen those muscles in looking, analyzing, and articulating and refreshing your sense of critical inquiry. And truth is, that applies to almost everybody. Who doesn't need those skills? From nursery school teacher to shock and trauma nurse to Navy SEAL, who doesn't need those skills?
Hi, Phil Kirby here, producer of The Evolving Leader. Back in Season 2, Episode 19, we spoke to the incredible Sir John Kay, one of the world's leading economists whose life's work has been focused on the relationship between economics and businesses, and whom in the book Radical Uncertainty draws our attention to the approach that many economists and business strategists take regarding risk in the face of uncertainty. If you've not listened to this episode, then I strongly suggest you add it to your Evolving Leader playlist. I'll leave a link in the show notes.
I love this advice on, what are you seeing versus what are you thinking? Is it an important next question with certain problems to then ask, what are we not seeing?
Oh, yes. Oh, I think that's more important than what we're seeing. I have a name for that. What we're not seeing is called the pertinent negative. What's missing, what's conspicuously absent, needs to be articulated. I can't take credit for the pertinent negative. I stole that from emergency medicine. I steal things all the time from people. I tell them, but I steal them. So the pertinent negative becomes a really powerful tool. If you are evaluating someone's performance, don't just tell them what they did. You have to tell them what they didn't do, otherwise they can't fix it. But to train your brain to see what's not there, if you're a parent, I tell parents this all the time, when your kids come home from school, what they don't tell you is more important than what they do. What they don't talk about what happened. I thought, my kid's 19, still what he doesn't tell me, I know to ask. So the pertinent negative, seeing what's not there, is I think as important, if not more so. And it applies to people in law enforcement and people in the intelligence community. And one quick example I'll give you, we had some troops out in Afghanistan, rural Afghanistan, and they're on the ground and they're making friends with people in different communities. And they noticed that the women had stopped talking to them. Why were the women in rural Afghanistan not talking to our troops anymore? They had been for months and months and months. Why didn't they? You know why? Sunglasses. Women in rural Afghanistan cannot make eye contact with men. And if you're wearing sunglasses, they can't see if you're looking at them or not, and they won't even talk to you through a translator. So we had to look at what wasn't happening in relation to what was happening, and what had changed in the last 6 months. Newly issued sunglasses. Nobody was talking to them.
Wow.
Pertinent negative. What isn't happening? The women have stopped talking to us. What is it? And they narrowed it down to sunglasses. Fascinating. I just love my work.
I love your work too.
I think this idea of pertinent negative is, is incredibly valuable. When you ask the question of people, what aren't we talking about? They don't know. They don't even, because they're not thinking about it. So give us
what the practical aspect of that is, though? So one of my mentors, he used to be a professional con man, professional thief, Apollo Robbins. He's so great. He'll shake your hand and steal your watch, like at the same time. It's amazing. Anyway, he says, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You have to use them proportionally. So we need to be listening. I believe that good leaders listen twice as much as they talk. So when I meet a new client for the first time, at the end of the meeting, I combine listening with the pertinent negative, and this is what I say to them. Is there anything we didn't talk about today that you want to bring to the table? Perfectly selfish. I want to make sure that they know that their interests are of interest to me, and it's not just about what Amy Herman has to say, what I'm going to present. I want to know what their objectives are, because then I can craft a better presentation if I know what their objectives are. And I'm also telling them, you know what? I can't think of everything. I can't cover every single point. And I want to hear what you have to say, because I didn't talk about everything. So the question is there anything we didn't talk about today that you want to bring to the floor? And they'll say, wait, as a matter of fact, I want you to address A, B, C, and D. I leave with my bag full of things that I'm going to craft this presentation to address, and I come out smelling like a flower. Pertinent negative works. It's such a great skill, and people don't use it because they don't get on the other side of the issue.
I was intrigued by some of the kind of humility you expressed at the end of Fixed, around you feared at some point that you'd reach the limits of what you could achieve with using art and open-ended questions. But I think from what I'm gathering here, you've overcome that quite comprehensively. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you there?
Sure. The last chapter was a gift. I'm not a particularly religious person, but I'm spiritual, and there was some kind of divine intervention. I had reached a writer's block about 3/4 of the way into this book, and I thought, where am I going with this? How much can you really write about? I thought I had exhausted my first book, and I wrote the second book because I realized that everybody has problems to solve and that I hadn't reached the end of the road, but I had reached a writer's block. And the theme of this book follows a certain painting. It's called The Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Géricault, and it starts the book, and it's this harrowing painting, but how the painter was inspired and prepared it, drafted, etc. And so I get this writer's block, and what do? I practice what I preach. I said, you know what, I'm going to go to the Whitney for a little while. I'm going to go clear my head. I'm going to go look at some paintings and see if I can sort this out, because I didn't know where to go with it. So I went to see an exhibition of Julie Meritou, and she's one of my favorite paintings. She's American Ethiopian. She makes these huge abstract paintings. They're just take up a whole room, and they just suck you in. You just look at them, and they're beautiful. Anyway, so I get to the Whitney, and the last gallery in the Whitney faces the Hudson River. It's this spectacular gallery with bright light, and the sunshine is always streaming in. And nobody who owned a Julie Meritou wanted their painting in that gallery. Can you imagine? Like, nobody who went to the exhibition said, nope, can't put it in last gallery, because the light was so bright that they were afraid that it was going to ruin their painting. So what did Meritou do, faced with the problem? She solved her problem by painting a painting that would fill the last gallery. She's like, well, if nobody's going to lend their paintings, I'll make one. And she made this huge painting, and I looked at it. It's really quite beautiful. It's abstract. And I went to read the label, and I started to cry. The title of the painting is her homage to the Raft of the Medusa. And I thought, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And all of a sudden, it all came together. Julie Meritou was facing a problem that she had to fix. She had an empty last gallery. So she made her own painting. And that painting happened to be an homage to the painting that I've been writing about my entire book. And I was like, all the pieces came together. And the beautiful thing about her painting is it faces out onto the Hudson River. And from those windows, you could see the Statue of Liberty. And she brought in issues of immigration and discrimination, all the social justice issues that we are facing right now that Géricault was facing back when he painted The Raft of the Medusa. So I just came home and just wrote this last essay, and I thought, we have this ending. It's about problem solving, that sometimes, what's the bottom line? You have to turn to yourself to solve a problem. You're not going to cajole any of your lenders to say, oh, come on, hang your painting. No, it was up to Meritou. She had to paint her own painting, and she did it, and she succeeded. So when we have no other solutions, turn to yourself and find a way to fix it. Mm-hmm. It was awesome. It was just so great.
Yeah, and I wasn't familiar with the story. I sort of knew it about the Raft of Medusa, but you tell the story beautifully in the book.
Thank you.
And it's very compelling and distressing as well.
And harrowing. People
yes.
hate each other. I mean,
cannibalism, yes.
Cannibalism. And nobody wants to look at this horrible painting where people are dehydrated and starved and the remains of cannibalism. But it's one of those things you can't look away. It's the original train wreck, of 1819. And this painting at the Louvre is 23 by 16 feet. It's this huge painting that has this huge part of the wall. And the raft itself was 23 by 66 feet, not that much bigger than the painting. And you think of, over 147 people on that raft. It is harrowing. But going back to homicide detectives, it's the worst of humanity. Mm. And yet, look what came of it. So it was great inspiration. It was really, nobody wants to write about such a gross painting, but it served as this motif for me. I hope it worked throughout the book.
Yeah, no, it really did. And I'm not going to do the through line because people should read it for themselves. But it's very powerful. So let's talk a little bit about your new book for children. What's that about? And
I wish I had it in front of me. It's called Smart, little s, little m, capital ART. And the subtitle is Use Your Eyes to Boost Your Brain. And basically the takeaways are as applicable for adults. I think some of my adults would benefit from reading the children's book. It's 3 things: how to see, how to think about what you see, and how to talk about what you see. So it's not only about keeping kids in safe situations. It's how do you handle the first day of 2nd grade or 4th grade when you're a new kid in the school? How do you deal with watching a bully when you're not being bullied? What do you see? How do you think about what you see? And how do you talk about it? And it gives kids another tool in this digital world, because they're all digital natives now. It reminds them that the most powerful tool of observation is what I remind my clients. There is no substitute for a pair of human eyes attached to a human brain. There is no substitute. Artificial intelligence notwithstanding, your eyes are so powerful. And so I've adapted the book, and it's full of, I think it has 100 works of art in it for kids to think about looking at works of art to really help them navigate a world that we certainly didn't grow up in. We didn't grow up in the world that the kids have now.
That's so cool. When does that come out? Because I'd like to get that for my girls.
It's exciting. It comes out I just heard the publication. Here's the good news. The publication day is October of this year. It's gotten some really nice advanced praise. It's just, as I said, what I'm not doing is rocket science. It's just different. It's the idea of taking art off museum walls and saying that it can actually be used for a lot of other things. That's my hope.
So, Amy, as we bring our time to a close, what's the biggest takeaway here?
The takeaway, it's going to sound aspirational, but I'm going to quote Henry James. And the idea is try to be the person on whom nothing is lost. Try to be the person on whom nothing is lost. And if looking at art can get you there, terrific. But if you go out during the day and say to yourself, I'm going to notice one thing today that I didn't notice yesterday, and you do that every day, eventually you're going to train your brain to go from this, to go from narrow vision to wider vision. And I think not only does it help you be a more effective leader, I think it augments your engagement with your whole world. Try to be that person on whom nothing is lost.
And for me, I'd love to get a piece of advice from you in terms of, for our audience, if there was a painting that you could direct people to go and look at online and plant a few questions in their minds as they look at it, what would that be?
Well, the Raft of the Medusa is a natural, but it's pretty complicated, so I'm going to go simpler. I'm going to recommend that you look at the work of Giorgio Morandi. He's an Italian artist, born in Bologna, died in Bologna, hardly ever left Bologna. And he painted the same things over and over and over again. Cups, jars, vases, and saucers. Cups, jars, vases, and saucers. Every day, over and over again. And there's this beautiful quiet subtext in the work of Morandi that says we all have to move our pieces around every day. We all do the same thing every day, but no 2 days are ever the same. And his paintings really aren't about cups, saucers, vases, and jars. They're about light and weight and volume and shadow. And every day he saw those same things in a different light. And that's how we live our lives. But we should never see the same things the same way 2 days in a row. So if you look up Giorgio Morandi, Morandi, you'll see just moving those things around, and no 2 days will ever be the same again.
Love that. I think that's a great place to to finish our conversation. Amy, on behalf of our audience and Scott and I and Phil, our producer, thank you so much.
Amy, thank you. So be sure to pick up a copy of Amy's latest book today, Fixed. And if you haven't watched her TED Talk, do that as well. And until next time, remember, the world is evolving. Are you?